What is propaganda? What is indoctrination? The definitions for these terms are highly subjective because what one person's education might be could be another person's indoctrination. I don't really think there's an objective standard by which you can determine what is or is not propaganda, but I think past certain levels you can see pretty clearly how far things have gone. The things that I'm most suspicious of when it comes to propaganda are types of information that promote the interests of another group of people, usually the group of people who are speaking to you, okay? So to me, the hallmark of a really good educational system is one where you're taught information inconvenient to the state. I'm really, really, really fond of that, okay? Now, American education is absolute crap, okay? American education is garbage. It really, really is. One of the main reasons for that is because it's so highly decentralized. In one country, or sorry, not country, county in America, in one school district, you can get a really robust education. I went to Beverly High. My education was pretty good, you know? It wasn't a private school, but it was pretty good. But I had friends who I found online, you know, afterwards. They went to school in Texas. It wasn't as good. It wasn't as good at all. But the main problem that I had with that difference in educational quality stemmed not from the actual amount or the quality of the information that was taught to you, it came from the bias behind it, okay? Now, when I went to school, when I went to high school, I learned a lot of information that wasn't in the interest of the state to teach me. Does that make sense? I learned about the Japanese internment camps. I learned about slavery. I learned about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I learned about a lot of the worst moments of American history, you know? Not all of them, not even close. I don't know if 4 years in high school is enough time to teach all the bad shit America's done, you know? But I learned about a lot of it. And when I talked to my friends from Texas, they hadn't, which is odd. Educational quality can vary in a lot of ways. In many parts of America, the money that schools use comes from the property taxes in that school district, meaning that if a school is in a wealthy area, the property taxes there are really high, it all gets funneled into the school, and that school is very wealthy, meaning those kids in the wealthy area, they get a good education, and then they go on and they use that better education to get a higher, you know, paying job, and so on and so forth. Whereas poor communities, their property taxes are relatively scarce, and that leads to their schools being underfunded. That's quality of education in one way. But in my mind, the quality of education is also largely determined by the state's willingness to teach you information which is inconvenient to it. Sex education is a big one right there. There are parts of America where you're not going to get any sex education, like at all, like basically nothing, okay? You're going to get some cringe abstinence-only education, and that's it. And that's really, really destructive in a lot of ways. I mean, like, seriously, like, that's so bad for, I mean, not only does it lead to like higher teen pregnancy levels, but it also leads to a lot of insecurity and like social problems. And the only reason why we do that is because evangelical Christians have a lot of control over American politics. That's not good. Do you all know about Japan's fervent unwillingness to really own up to a lot of the war crimes that they committed in World War II? That's a common one. I learned about that when I was in high school as well. It was sort of a teaching moment. Over in Japan, they are very not willing to touch on the terrible shit Japan did during World War II. And man, the Japanese during World War II, they were setting records, okay? Yeah. Unit 451, what is this? Yeah, listen, Nazi Germany gets a lot of the bad rap, but Japan? Wow, they were pretty bad. I mean, way, 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 way worse than a lot of people are taught here in America. In Japan, they barely teach it at all. They were taught a completely different set of war principles. Now, that's not to say that Japan was worse than Germany in World War II. Holocaust kind of trumps all in that respect. But there were some interesting differences in how they conducted themselves during warfare. For example, the Japanese Empire would teach their soldiers never to be captured because if they were captured, they would be raped to death by the American military. So rather than allow themselves to be captured and put in POW camps, which they probably would have survived in. They would slit their own wrists, sit on grenades, or shoot themselves in the head to avoid being captured. They essentially created a suicide cult, which prevented not only us from getting any prisoners, but, you know, or take cyanide, yeah. Another big thing that they did in Japan, if I remember correctly, now I'm pretty sure I'm being specific with this. In Japan, on the Japanese front, American soldiers, they had their medics not wear any identifying information. On the Western front, with Germany and stuff, you don't shoot medics, or at least medics are deprioritized in combat. It's essentially a gentleman's code in warfare. If medics run up to the front line and try to like pull back the bodies of their comrades, if you see that red cross right there in their helmet, you don't kill them. It's a medic. The Japanese shot medics first. Now, that's not to say that everybody followed that rule perfectly. They definitely didn't. Plenty of medics died. But there was a big difference in the explicit treatment of, you know, of these and other, you know, warfare rules. Oh yeah, I believe the Soviets were also pretty bad about that. Whatever the case may be, governments do a lot of really bad stuff. America does a lot of really bad stuff too. I'm really not trying to let us off the hook for this one, okay? And I get concerned when educational systems do an inadequate job of framing the information that they receive with regards to making their population sufficiently critical of the things that they've done. So, oh yeah, Israel today still does this. Israel will shoot at like medics from the Palestinian territories, do they not? Or at least there have been several high priority instances of them doing that. Hollow point bullets, yeah. It's just really really cringe stuff. It's just not great. It's not good. It's not good. The reason why I'm talking about all of this, the reason why this is important to me, I'm sorry, the Soviets were bad about it, or so were Germans in the Eastern Front. Germans tossed the rule book from the start, so I don't really fault the Soviet troops from the team. Oh, that's true. The Germans thought of the Soviets basically as subhuman, and the Soviets didn't like the Germans. You can figure out why that was the case. Things were a little bit more, I don't want to use the term civilized, but I think there were a couple more agreed upon rules sort of implicitly on the Western Front between the Allied forces, sans Russia, and Germany. I'm sorry, this is like a million bajillion pages of research that we need to do to even begin to fully dip into the subject. But indoctrination. America indoctrinates its people. It indoctrinates them in a very interesting way. America does not have an official state ideology. There are people in chat who will say, oh yeah, it's capitalism. Oh yeah, it's American exceptionalism. That's not necessarily the case. First of all, an official state ideology is explicitly described, defined, and defended. That's not the case here in America. Most Americans, I want to be perfectly clear, have no idea what capitalism is, like none whatsoever. Most Americans have a vague internalized understanding of American exceptionalism, but it's not like you grow up being taught, at least nowadays you don't, in most parts of the country, because in some parts, I don't know sometimes, where the teacher like points at the whiteboard and they're like, we are American exceptionalists, and this is what we believe, and then it's like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and it all like pounds upon each other. Usually it's a little bit more subtle. The way we indoctrinate our population is a little more subtle than that. It's not about driving a single state ideology. It's about presenting information in a context or a framework that gets people stochastically to arrive at certain conclusions on their own, conclusions that are beneficial to the state. Now, saying that the Pledge of Allegiance is a pretty obvious and immediate example of direct indoctrination. But one of the reasons why America is able to exist in the form that it does is because its indoctrination is soft. A frustration that I have is that a lot of people, this is something that I dealt with from Bernie or Busters all the time, okay? Is that because America's democracy is flawed, they don't recognize that it could be a lot worse. There are a lot of people who are like, America doesn't have a democracy. Our democracy is fake. We have a corporatocracy. This is patently untrue, and believing that makes you a much worse political advocate. In reality, America's democracy is robust enough that changes in public opinion can lead to changes in policy. That's not the case in a non-democracy. We know this. In America, political policy does tend to lag behind, but nonetheless follow changes in Americans' political perspectives, whether it comes trans, gay people, racial issues, and even sometimes economic issues, though those are a little bit more difficult for reasons that I'm about to get into. The way our democracy functions isn't by rejecting the principles of democracy, but rather by stacking the deck very heavily in favor of a set of ideas and a collection of people. That's how our democracy is stacked. So let me give you an example, okay? Let me give you an example. There's let's say that you're an all-powerful, super secret leader of democracy. You know, you're the person pulling the strings behind the shadows, you know, and you want to make sure that a popular position, you're George Soros. You want to make sure that a popular position does not get made into law, okay? Let me think of an example. Let's say green energy regulations. Do you understand? Green energy regulations, okay? Now, that'd be super cool, green energy regulations. If we could have that, I'd like that personally. I'd be a pretty big fan of that. But this person, this nefarious individual, would not. Yes, Sake Tanuki, the person behind the... we being real right now, chat? Get a new joke. Jesus. So anyway, let's say that we're looking for some change in this dynamic. What do you do to prevent that from taking place? Well, as an authoritarian, here's something you could do. You could just prevent... Wait, I'm actually going to remove chat from a screen if you people don't chill. I'm actually trying to have a serious conversation with you guys. What is wrong with you people? Here, you can come back when you learn how to behave, okay? Jesus Christ. You can take the authoritarian road. The authoritarian road would be just preventing, you know, green energy regulations from being passed in the government. You know, you can just prevent it from happening. That's one way to do it. America doesn't really do things that way. Another thing that you could do is spend billions of dollars pushing corporations to disseminate anti-green energy regulation advertisings. Over the course of decades, you push this idea over and over in the minds of Americans. Commonly, the idea that green energy regulation will increase the cost of gas, that it's ineffective, that climate change isn't real, the science is still out there, why is it still snowing if the world is getting warmer, etc., 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 you know? And that latter way is usually how America works. Rather than just breaking the democracy, instead you try to manufacture consent, which is the name of a book, in part written by Noam Chomsky, which describes in phenomenal detail the incredible work that people in power put into changing the minds of the American population. It's incredible stuff, really. All of the subtle ways public opinions are moved on X and Y. I'll give you an example of manufacturing consent, okay? This one's super easy. Here, I'll bring you people back. American exceptionalism is the idea that, well, there's something exceptional about America. You know, like not just that we have a large economy, but something fundamentally essential. There's something inherent to how good America is. That's the idea. And it gets taught in schools, but it doesn't get taught directly, for the most part. Maybe there are some crazy backwoods schools that teach this, but for the most part, nowadays, people aren't like having the teacher run up to them and go, America's better than everything else, and you'd better believe it. It's usually not that direct. Instead, what'll happen is historical and political information will be pushed in a way which subtly directs people's opinions. For example, many of the high school textbooks that are used in this country are published by the same set of like corporate and highly conservative textbook companies, which means they get to decide the content of those textbooks. They get to decide, yeah, Pearson, what American students learn, and those big textbook companies are directly connected to politicians and political interests and PACs that are, you know, interested in having you believe a certain set of things over another. So nobody grows up believing in the ideology of American exceptionalism. Instead, people grow up internalizing the tenets of American exceptionalism and regurgitating them without thinking about it. That's what makes it so goddamn effective. If you make all of this explicit, if you make it textbook, if you make it open and rote right there on the page, then you give the game away to an extent. Vosh, how is this functionally different? I see you all capsing in chat. Can you shut the fuck up and learn for 2 seconds in your life? If you had paid any attention in elementary school, you wouldn't be so shocked by what I'm saying now. That's the reason why manufacturing consent is so important for preserving American hegemony, okay? Because A, if you start openly, deliberately presenting propaganda, people are going to get angry. That's what happened with Trump's 1776 Commission. Trump's 1776 Commission would have been a change from the implicit manufacturing consent approach of American education today to an explicit, direct, dogmatic propaganda approach. Can you recognize the distinction between these two things? And if you can't, why were any of you opposed to Trump's 1776 education? Or, yeah, patriotic education? Because if you believe these are the same things, then why oppose that? You know? Let me see if I can find these tenets. Hold on. Trump's patriotic education. Wow, that's quite a bit. Well, we can go over the pointers, huh? Here's the 1776 Commission, which published this final report, which was an outline for patriotic education that the Trump administration wanted to push. The meaning of the Declaration, a constitution of principles, challenges to America's principles: slavery, progressivism, fascism, communism, racism, and identity politics. Let's take a look at that real quick, okay? Let's just roll on into that one. Just want to take a peep. Constitution of principles. Where are you? Here we go. Challenges to America's principles. Challenges to constitutional government are frequent and to be expected in popular government based on consent. In his farewell address, George Washington, etc., etc., etc. More problematic have been movements that reject the fundamental truths of the Declaration of Independence and seek to destroy our constitutional order. The arguments, tactics, and names of these movements have changed, and the magnitude of the challenge has varied, yet they all are united by the adherence to the same falsehood, that people do not have equal worth or equal rights. And then forthcoming, I imagine that it's laying out these criticisms, putting fascism and slavery directly alongside progressivism. Progressivism held that truths were not permanent, but only relative to their time. They reject the self-evident truth of the Declaration that all men are created equal and endowed equally, either by nature or by God, with unchanging rights. Yeah, we have progressivism directly next to fascism, and then communism right here. Communism seems to preach a radical or extreme form of human equality. In the communist mind, people are not born equal and free. They are defined entirely by their class, etc., etc. So, if this stuff had been made a part of the American educational system, there would have been a direct, deliberate, and textual obligation on the part of teachers to portray progressivism alongside slavery as evils which oppose American constitutionalism. Now, the reason why lefties didn't like the 1776 Commission or patriotic education is because, in addition to it being ludicrously inaccurate, it was also incredibly propagandistic in a more direct and dogmatic way than what we currently see in America today. Now, again, I ask you, is there a difference between how America conducts its indoctrination today versus how it did or would have under patriotic education? At Vosh, why does it matter if it was direct? Hold on. So chat recognizes why it matters if it was direct. Chat recognizes. See? Look, they understand. H-Ravo. Maybe if you paid more attention in class, you would understand as well. See? Look at this. You're the last one in the class. You're being left behind. Do you see? It matters because the more overt The more direct propaganda becomes, the harder it is to challenge people who grow up believing it, and the easier it is to use it as a way of consolidating state power. We know this because authoritarian governments in the past have adopted these tenets as a way of cultivating ideological orthodoxy amongst their student population. Of course, we had that with Nazi Germany. You know, you had Hitler framed in the front of the class, and they weren't just, by the way, they weren't just teaching Germany's history and kind of like implying or inferring the superiority of the Aryan race. They would just outright state it. It would be on test questions, you know? Nowadays, if you have a test question in America, which is like, name 3 reasons why Americans are superior to the Indian race, they would probably get screenshotted, put to social media, and that teacher would probably get fired. That's a good thing, you know? The directness means that they have abandoned the comfort of implicit indoctrination. It means they're comfortable going more all out. That's a bad thing. So I am very skeptical of governments which promote something which I would call a state ideology. It's really tough to move a person off a state ideology, you know? It's not just that they have a set of principles or ideas that are ingrained into their minds passively through their educational system. It's also a very overt and direct means of targeting them and preventing them from being swayed otherwise. So, wait. Lulu's ideology thinks she's trying to say that you don't know about Vietnam's education system. For all I know, it's insanely hardcore indoctrination. Therefore, all I know, it's possibly honest about the bad stuff that Vietnam did. So I'm not talking just about Vietnam here, but I will say this. The fact that Marxism-Leninism is an ideology taught essentially throughout the entirety of one's education and is aligned with the state ideology of Ho Chi Minh thought, which is dedicated in part to reverence of their founding revolutionary grandpa, is a little bit strange to me. I want to be perfectly forthcoming, okay, here. The idea that they're not teaching socialism, they're not teaching, like, economics, it's Marxism-Leninism and the glory of Ho Chi Minh thought with an ideology and a state ideology practiced around the name of their founder, that is strange to me. Now, is it possible that in the context of those aesthetics, it's entirely, you know, possible that it's still good, meaningful education that's not indoctrination? That's totally fine. That's entirely possible. It could very well be the case. But you gotta admit it's a warning sign. It's definitely something worth looking into. I just find that a lot of people stop being critical of state power and stop being critical of indoctrination when they hear words they like, you know? When it's like, state ideology of America promotes American exceptionalism, it's like, yeah, bad, it's bad, fuck you. But then when it's like, you know, Chinese state ideology practicing Dengism, something like that, it's like, woo, absolutely, go that. It's just really weird, you know? I don't know. Yeah. I've taught in Vietnamese public schools. It's very rote learning based. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. In America, we deny economic critical thought. In America, we don't even teach economics. They don't teach econ in high school. If you want to learn about economics in America, you need to try to get a degree in it. Or maybe you get one course in it in like general education, you know? Don't they? Did you have econ in high school? Wait, hold on. Wait, did I just miss out? If there is high school econ, it's probably just like supply-demand curves. Only AP? Ah, okay. I had AP English, but not econ. Is it just an AP thing? What do you even teach in high school econ? It's probably like supply-demand curves. Oh, here we go. Timeforlearning.com, high school economics curriculum. Introduction to Econ, Microeconomics, Macroeconomics, Fiscal and Monetary Policy, Government and Business, the Global Economy. These are probably pretty memey. Resources and Scarcity, 3 questions of economics, opportunity cost. Yeah. I wonder how much of this is indoctrinating. Probably a good bit of it. Basic scarcity stuff. If it's basic scarcity stuff, then it's not indoctrinating because that is an economic principle that, you know, does exist. Regulatory policy, economic policy, influential theories, labor, business structures, entrepreneurship. You know, it'd be a really good meme. What, you know, would be really cool? What if we could get our hands on like a high school econ textbook and we could go over it and we could proofread it for like indoctrinating bullshit, you know?